The worst part wasn't the sound of my body hitting the floor during Christmas dinner. It was the silence afterward. 23 family members were in that room. Not one of them stood up to help me. Not even my own mother. My name is Simona Cunningham. I'm 29 years old. And until that December night, I truly believed I already knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. Rock bottom has another level beneath it, and it smells like my stepfather's cheap cologne, pine needles from the Christmas tree, and pure betrayal. Before I go on, go ahead and hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Thank you. Now let me take you back to Christmas Eve at the annual Cunningham-Morrison family gathering. You know the type, matching ugly sweaters nobody actually wants to wear, enough food to feed a small army, and tension hanging in the air like badly seasoned gravy. Frank had been my stepfather for 10 years by then, but that night he was especially unbearable. He'd started drinking his special vintage wine before noon, wine I knew for a fact was just Trader Joe's cheapest bottle poured into a fancy glass decanter. All evening, he kept throwing subtle jabs my way. Little comments about how I was sitting in premium real estate at the table. About how some people earn their place in life, while others merely inherit it. My cousin Jennifer kept giving me those side-eye looks that said, "What is wrong with him tonight?" Then, at exactly 7:47 p.m., I remember because I was staring at the grandfather clock just to avoid looking at him, everything changed. The front door flew open with a dramatic flair only Brittany could pull off. My stepsister had arrived 2 hours late, designer shopping bag swinging from her arms, even though she'd claimed she was bankrupt just last month. Frank's face instantly lit up like she was some kind of miracle. What happened next still replays in slow motion inside my head. Frank stood up. Walked straight over to me. To the same seat I had sat in for 29 years. The same spot my late father used to jokingly call Simona's throne. Then, in front of everyone, he announced that his real daughter needed a proper place at the table. I didn't move fast enough for him. So he grabbed my chair, while I was still sitting in it, and yanked it backward. I tried to stand, got tangled in the tablecloth, and crashed hard onto the floor. My hip slammed against the hardwood. My dress tore. Cranberry sauce exploded across the table like a crime scene. But still, the worst part was the silence. 23 people, including my own mother, just sat there, watching, as if this were some kind of twisted dinner theater show. My grandmother let out a tiny gasp, the same sound she makes when someone uses the wrong fork. Uncle Ted, in all his tasteless glory, had his phone out recording everything, probably planning to post it on Facebook for laughs. And my mother? Her face wore that familiar frozen expression she had perfected over the years. The look that said she saw nothing, heard nothing, and would say absolutely nothing. As I pushed myself up from the floor, cranberry sauce dripping onto my grandmother's vintage tablecloth, I heard Frank mutter under his breath that I should be grateful I was even invited. That's when I noticed it. His business phone was lying face up and unlocked on the kitchen counter. In my world of corporate compliance, we call that an opportunity. I left that house that night with my dignity shattered, but something else completely intact. My late father's old laptop was safely hidden in my car. And my own phone now held photos of every single message on Frank's screen. He thought he had just humiliated a nobody. What he didn't realize was that sometimes, the nobody knows everything. And to understand why that single shove changed my life forever, you first need to know what the last 10 years had really been like. Frank Morrison walked into our lives like a knight in shining armor, if that armor came from Men's Warehouse and the knight drove a leased BMW he could barely afford. My mother had been a widow for 2 years when Frank suddenly appeared at our church's Widows and Widowers support group. Looking back now, it feels less like a coincidence and more like a wolf calmly walking into a room full of sheep. He locked onto my mother instantly, faster than Brittany burns through credit cards. At first, the favoritism was subtle. Almost polite. Brittany got a brand new Honda for her 18th birthday. Shiny. Perfect. When I turned 18, Frank handed me a bus pass and a lecture about building self-sufficiency. I actually laughed back then. I thought he was trying to teach me character. Turns out, the joke was on me. College is where everything really shifted. My father had created education funds for me before he died. I had seen the statements when I was younger. I knew that money existed. But when the time came to access it, the accounts were suddenly empty. Market volatility, Frank explained calmly, while somehow finding $60,000 to send Brittany to a private art college. She dropped out in her junior year to become an influencer. Today, her Instagram has 247 followers. At least half of them are bots. My mother changed too. The woman who once ran charity galas and commanded entire rooms slowly faded into Frank's shadow. She became his personal echo. Whatever Frank thinks is best, that became her favorite sentence. Like a wind-up doll programmed with only 5 approved responses. And here was the deepest twist of the knife, the family business. The logistics company my father had built from nothing, small, but strong and profitable, was now under Frank's control. While my mother was still drowning in grief, he convinced her to make him CEO. I watched him strut through my father's old office, resting his golf clubs against the wall, sitting in my father's chair as if he had earned any of it. But Frank didn't realize one thing. I was watching him just as closely as he was using us. 3 years into their marriage, I noticed strange numbers in the company books during a family dinner when he left his laptop open. 5 years in, I saw property transfers that didn't make sense. 7 years in, I stopped just noticing, and started keeping copies. Last Thanksgiving, my grandmother pulled me aside in the kitchen. While the turkey hissed in the oven, she pressed something small into my hand. A USB drive. "Your father's old laptop," she whispered. "The one from the garage. Don't let Frank know you have it. There are things on there, things he should have told you before he died." Then she turned back to basting the turkey like she hadn't just handed me a live grenade. As Brittany failed at one career attempt after another, Frank only grew bolder. First she was going to be a fashion designer. Then a party planner. Then a life coach, which was almost funny, considering she couldn't manage her own life. Each failure cost thousands. And every time, the money came from the same place. The company my father built. The pattern became predictable. Brittany would crash. Frank would explode about lazy millennials. Then suddenly, there would be money for her next disaster. Meanwhile, I was pulling 60-hour weeks in corporate compliance, taking night classes for my CPA, and still being told how Brittany was the future of the family. Christmas night, I sat alone in my apartment with ice on my hip and fire in my chest. The champagne I had bought for the family toast sat untouched on the counter. Turns out, humiliation pairs better with coffee and fury. I pulled out my father's old laptop, the one I had hidden in my closet for a year. Too scared to open it. Too scared of what I might find, or what I might not. The USB drive my grandmother gave me felt heavy in my palm. Tonight felt like the right night. The password was my birthday. My father was a genius in business, and terrible with passwords. What appeared on that screen made my hands shake. Email archives going back 15 years. Folders labeled insurance, will, for Simona. And one folder that made my stomach drop. If something happens. The first discovery hit me like ice water. My father's real will had protections I had never seen. The family business was supposed to stay in trust until I turned 30. Mandatory payments were to begin at 25. The house was never meant to be in Frank's name. There were safeguards. Clauses. Barriers. So where had this will gone during probate? My hands flew to my phone. I opened the photos I'd taken of Frank's messages earlier that night. Thank God for his narcissism and his need for a 15-minute ham photo shoot. His text messages told a story darker than any Netflix series. Brittany owed money to people with names like Big Tony and Vegas Mike. The numbers made my vision blur. $200,000. Maybe more. Frank had been juggling sharks like it was a circus act. Then I found the mother lode. Messages between Frank and someone named Carl. They discussed restructuring assets, moving inventory offshore, creating shell companies, using the family business as collateral for massive loans, all to fund Brittany's lifestyle. In my line of work, we have one word for that. Fraud. My phone buzzed nonstop. The family WhatsApp group was exploding. Uncle Ted had posted the video of my fall with crying laughing emojis. But the reactions didn't go the way he planned. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jennifer wrote. "This is disgusting," Aunt Martha added. Then Jennifer called me. She worked in a law firm handling foreclosures. She told me she had seen our mother's house on a preliminary list. Frank had taken out 3 mortgages without telling anyone. The house my father built with his own hands was about to be lost, to pay for Brittany's failed boutique, her failed food truck, her failed everything. That's when I opened my laptop and began to type. Every email was scheduled to send at 3 a.m. One went to Frank's business partners. One to the IRS tip line. One to the state attorney general. One to Brittany's creditors, with Frank's real financials attached. And one to my mother, with my father's true will. Each email was flawless. Calm. Professional. Absolutely devastating. 10 years of compliance training was about to pay off in ways my company never intended. I attached Uncle Ted's video to several of the emails. Let them all see exactly who Frank Morrison really was. I woke up at 5:58 a.m. on Christmas morning, 2 minutes before my alarm. I made coffee. Sat in my father's old reading chair. And waited. At exactly 6:23 a.m., Frank's world began to collapse. The first call came from Carl. And I could hear Frank's phone ringing through the ceiling of my apartment. He lived 3 floors above me. Yet another thing he had convinced my mother to pay for. Then another call came in. Then another. And another. By 6:45 a.m., Frank's phone wasn't ringing anymore, it was screaming. I opened the family WhatsApp group and watched the implosion in real time. At 6:31 a.m., Frank had typed, "Simona, what did you do?" All in caps. At 6:32 a.m., he tried to delete it. Too late. 17 people had already screenshotted it. Suddenly, Uncle Ted wasn't laughing anymore. By some twist of poetic justice, his precious little video had landed on TikTok overnight. 50,000 views by sunrise. And climbing fast. Quick pause here, friends, if you're enjoying this Karma Christmas special, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your worst family dinner story. Your support truly keeps these stories alive. Now, back to the chaos. Frank's business partners were the first dominoes to fall. Carl. Fred. Rick. Andy. Uma. Derek. I swear those are their real names. The fact that they spell something almost obscene feels like the universe adding its own commentary. Each of them received beautifully organized documentation of Frank's creative accounting. The IRS tip line got 5 full years of discrepancies, neatly labeled and timestamped like a gift basket for investigators. Brittany's creditors received the real jackpot, Frank's actual assets, his hidden accounts, and proof that he'd been lying about his finances while Brittany skipped payment after payment. And Big Tony? Big Tony does not enjoy being played for a fool. My mother's email was different. She received the original will. The real one. Along with records of every illegal property transfer, every stolen fund withdrawal, every silent theft that took place while she was buried in grief. I ended it with just one question. Did you know, or did you choose not to know? By 7 a.m., Frank was standing at my door. Not pounding. Not demanding. Whimpering. Through the peephole, I saw him in his Christmas pajamas, a phone in each shaking hand, both ringing non-stop. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 30 minutes. And then Brittany's voice blasted through the hallway. She was screaming because her credit cards had been declined, at Starbucks. Yes. On Christmas morning, of all days, she had gone to Starbucks. The entitlement was somehow almost impressive. She was shouting that Frank had to fix it immediately, threatening to expose his side business if he didn't. Even I hadn't known about a side business, so now things were officially getting better than expected. My mother arrived at 7:30 a.m. Still in her nightgown. A coat thrown over it like she'd rushed out into the cold without thinking. The look on her face wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was awakening. Like a woman who had sleepwalked for 10 years, and had finally opened her eyes. By 8 a.m., Frank's phone showed 47 missed calls. I know because he kept screaming the number like it meant something. Lawyers. Creditors. Business partners. Investigators. Even Brittany's art school, calling about fraudulent loan applications. Each ring was another nail in the coffin he had built with his own hands. The family chat had evolved from confusion to commentary. Jennifer posted, "Karma is working overtime this Christmas." Grandmother typed only one word. Finally. My mother still hadn't written a single message, but I could see that she was reading everything. Every screenshot. Every document. Every truth I had laid bare. By 9 a.m., 3 news vans were parked outside our building. Uncle Ted's video hadn't just gone viral. Someone had tagged it. Evil stepdad gets exposed. And it was trending. On loop, across every platform, played the moment Frank ripped my chair out from under me, over and over again. Each share shattering another piece of his public image. 3 days after Christmas, just when I thought Frank was finished, he made one final, desperate move. What I now call the reverse victim shuffle. A strategy so bold I almost respected it. Almost. I was sitting in my apartment buried under legal paperwork when the doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Not Frank's frantic knocking this time. This was polished. The man at my door looked like a lawyer from Central Casting. Silver hair. Expensive suit. A smile that probably cost more than my car. His name was Richard Steinberg. And with a dramatic flourish usually reserved for magicians, he handed me a stack of legal papers. Only this rabbit had teeth. Frank was suing me for $2 million. Corporate espionage. Defamation. And something called intentional infliction of emotional distress. That last one made me laugh out loud. Apparently, that wasn't the response Richard expected. Frank had called in a favor from his golf buddy, the one who always cheated at the 9th hole. Richard Steinberg wasn't just any lawyer. He was the man who had gotten 3 major CEOs off on technicalities. His retainer alone cost more than Frank even had, but he was working on contingency, betting on a massive payout. The counterattack was actually clever. Frank claimed I had used my job in corporate compliance to steal trade secrets. That I had violated confidentiality agreements. That my malicious prosecution had cost him millions in lost business. He had even recruited 2 former co-workers of mine, Kelly and Marcus, both fired for expense fraud. They were suddenly willing to swear under oath that I had bragged about taking down my stepfather. Frank was swinging wildly now. And desperate men make dangerous mistakes. But the real shock didn't arrive until noon. Brittany showed up at my door with a camera crew. Not the news. A documentary crew. She'd hired some YouTube filmmaker named Chad to record what she called her truth, the story of a helpless sister being destroyed by a jealous, bitter stepsibling. She stood right outside my apartment door, fake tears trembling in her voice, spinning a tale about how I'd always resented her success, how I had supposedly forged evidence, how I was the real monster in this family story. And just like that, the narrative began to turn. Frank had hired a PR firm. Well, firm might be generous. It was really just a guy named Doug who ran a reputation management service out of his mom's basement. But somehow, disturbingly, it worked. Within hours, #falsely accused was trending. Someone edited Uncle Ted's video to make it look like I had thrown myself to the floor. And the internet, as it turns out, absolutely loves a conspiracy. By day 4, strangers were sending me death threats. People who had never met me were calling me pure evil, an ungrateful stepdaughter trying to destroy a hard-working, loving family man. My company placed me on administrative leave pending investigation. My neighbor started whispering that I was mentally unstable. Even relatives began to hesitate. Some of them started wondering out loud if maybe Frank had a point. Maybe I had gone too far. The worst moment came when my mother called. There was hesitation in her voice. Doubt. "Simona," she said quietly. "Frank's lawyer showed me documents. They look real. Did you plant evidence?" That question hit harder than the fall ever had. It felt like being shoved all over again. Frank even went on local morning television, the kind that usually covers lost dogs and bake sales. He wore his best suit and what I came to call his wounded deer expression. He talked about how he had raised me like his own. About the unbearable pain of betrayal. About how all he wanted was to reunite his broken family. The host nodded sympathetically. She didn't fact-check a single word. And Richard Steinberg? He was terrifyingly good. He found a technicality in how I accessed Frank's phone. Apparently, looking at an unlocked device could still be considered unauthorized access. He reframed my evidence as proof of obsession. He even suggested that I had manipulated my elderly grandmother into helping me. The hearing was set for December 30th. The judge, Harold Feinstein, was infamous for dramatic reversals. And Frank's team had everything now. Momentum. Media sympathy. A story the public wanted to believe. That night, I sat alone with my father's laptop and wondered if I had played my hand too early, if Frank was about to flip the entire table. Then December 29th arrived. And Frank's perfectly constructed lie collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. It started with Doug. Yes, that Doug. The PR expert. Turns out, running reputation rescue from your mom's basement has limits. Especially when your mom recognizes the criminal you're working for. Doug's mother, Barbara, knew Frank. Not from now. From 15 years ago. From Phoenix. Back when Frank was going by the name Francis Morrison Walsh, and had scammed 6 widows out of their savings before vanishing. Barbara didn't just call the police. She called every book club she'd ever been part of across 3 states. By noon, 14 women had stepped forward with stories. Different cities. Different names. Same scam. The wounded family man image evaporated instantly, faster than Brittany's modeling career. Then Kelly and Marcus, my former co-workers who had agreed to testify against me, suddenly found their consciences. Prompted by the FBI showing up at their doors. Apparently, lying in a federal investigation is still illegal, even if a powerful lawyer asks you to do it. They flipped in minutes. Both admitted Frank had paid them $5,000 each to lie. But the real bomb didn't come from prosecutors. It came from Richard Steinberg's own paralegal. Her name was Dorothy. Quiet. Invisible. Always taking notes. What no one knew was that our state is a one-party consent state, and Dorothy had been recording everything. For weeks. Frank had spoken freely in front of her. About fabricating evidence. Bribing witnesses. Even his plan to flee to Costa Rica once the settlement cleared. Dorothy didn't resign. She walked into the DA's office with 6 hours of recordings, color-coded transcripts, and a folder she labeled Conscience. Every dirty trick Richard and Frank had planned. Turns out, Dorothy's daughter had once been scammed by a stepfather too. She had been waiting her entire life for a moment like this. Meanwhile, the documentary filmmaker, Chad, accidentally became the hero no one saw coming. He'd been live-streaming portions of his footage to build hype. Instead, he captured Brittany on camera saying, "I know my dad's guilty, but who cares? We need the money." She even let slip the side business again. Fake luxury goods. Stored in the company warehouse. Sold online. By evening, Frank was back at my door. No cameras. No lawyers. Just a broken man with shaking hands and a collapsing universe. He tried the family card. "We can work this out," he whispered. "We're family." I recorded everything. Including the moment he offered me $50,000 to make it all go away. Then $100,000. Then finally. "Whatever you want. Just name your price." My mother arrived while he was still begging. She had spent the entire day with my grandmother digging through old photos, old files, and old recordings. And that's when she discovered the truth my father never lived long enough to reveal. He had suspected Frank before he died. He had hired a private investigator. Gathered evidence. But cancer took him before he could act. All of it had been sitting in a forgotten safety deposit box. Grief does strange things to memory. And then my mother played the recording. Frank's voice. Bragging. Laughing. Talking about landing the grieving widow jackpot. The look on his face when he heard his own words took my breath away. Almost made everything worth it. Almost. That night, after Frank finally slinked away in disgrace and my mother went home to face everything she had just learned, I sat alone with my father's laptop. There was one folder I had been avoiding since the very beginning. It was labeled simply, "For my daughter, open when ready." For the first time, I knew I was ready. I clicked. The first file was a video. My father appeared on the screen, thin from chemotherapy, his body weakened, but his eyes still bright and unbroken. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 3 weeks before he died. His voice was softer than I remembered, but his words were made of steel. "Simona," he said gently, "if you're watching this, then Frank Morrison has finally shown his true colors." My breath caught in my chest. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way a father should. But I've left you the tools to protect yourself." He lifted a thick folder into view. Everything in here is backed up in 3 places: the laptop, a safety deposit box at First National, and with my attorney, Mitchell Reeves, in Denver. And then, for the next 20 minutes, my father did what he always did best. He built a case, brick by brick. Frank's real name wasn't even Frank Morrison. It was Franklin Morris Worthington. For 20 years, he had been running the same con across 7 different states. My father had tracked down 11 victims. 11 widows. 11 families. He had recorded their stories. Collected police reports. Built a private archive of destruction. Frank wasn't just a con man. He was a serial predator. And his specialty was widows with children. Then my father said something that made my entire body go cold. "I didn't confront him because I needed him to believe he'd won," he explained softly. "You see, sweetheart, the FBI has been watching Frank for 5 years now." My hands flew to my mouth. "Agent Saracen approached me 6 months ago. We've been quietly building a federal case." The video continued as my father explained the trap he had set. The will Frank thought he destroyed? It was a decoy. The real will had been filed in Denver, ironclad and untouchable. The business accounts Frank accessed? Honeypots. Every transaction tracked. Even the house was never truly his. It had been placed into an irrevocable trust that would activate either on my 30th birthday, or the moment proof of Frank's fraud surfaced. Whichever came first. "I knew I wouldn't be there to trigger it," my father said, tears shining in his eyes. "But I knew my daughter would be strong enough to finish what I started." The next file was labeled, "Saracen, FBI contact." My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Miss Cunningham," she said calmly, "I was wondering when you'd call. Your father told me you'd know when the time was right." And then everything truly exploded. Frank's secretary, the woman he'd been secretly seeing for 3 years? She wasn't his mistress. She was Agent Sarah Chin. Undercover. For 3 years. She hadn't been sleeping with him. She'd been documenting everything. The fake luxury goods. The offshore money movement. The shell companies. The storage warehouse. It all connected to an international fraud network the FBI had been tracking for a decade. We were waiting for Frank to make his big move, Agent Chin told me. And his lawsuit against you? That was it. Her voice turned clinical. He's now committed wire fraud, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, bribery, and at least 15 additional federal felonies. Then she said the words I had been waiting for without even knowing it. We move in tomorrow morning. But my father wasn't finished with his surprises. Another folder sat beneath the others. It was labeled The Network. Inside was contact information for every single one of Frank's past victims. Over the past week, while I had been fighting a PR war alone, they had been finding each other. Barbara from the book club had connected them. They had formed a victims alliance. Hired a collective legal team. And were preparing the largest civil suit Frank had ever faced. Then I opened the final video. Recorded the day before my father entered hospice. He was sitting on my childhood bed, holding the old teddy bear he had given me when I was 5. Simona, he said softly, I need you to know 3 things. First, my father said gently, I am proud of the woman you've become. Tears blurred my vision. Second, your mother will need time to heal, but she will come back to herself. Be patient with her. Then he paused, and smiled. That mischievous smile I had missed so much. And third, he said softly, Frank's biggest mistake was underestimating you. He thinks you're just a sweet little compliance officer. He has no idea you inherited your fire from both your parents. His eyes sparkled. Give him hell, sweetheart. Then go live your beautiful life. The video ended with him placing my childhood teddy bear on my pillow. And whispering. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. Restore the balance, my darling girl. December 30th arrived with a blizzard. And a SWAT team. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. sharp. The FBI doesn't believe in sleeping in. Frank was dragged out in his underwear. Brittany was screaming about her rights. And somehow, unbelievably, Doug, the basement PR genius, was there too, having spent the night crisis managing from Frank's couch. All 3 were arrested. Doug was released later, once the authorities realized he was catastrophically stupid, not criminal. The court hearing scheduled for that morning never became Frank's lawsuit against me. Instead, Judge Harold Feinstein found himself presiding over an emergency federal asset freeze. The FBI presented their case with surgical precision. Agent Sarah Chin took the stand. 3 years of undercover work. Condensed into 2 hours of devastating truth. She laid everything bare. The embezzlement. The shell companies. The fraud. The money laundering. Then the courtroom went cold when she revealed the darkest detail of all. Frank had once planned to murder my father by switching his medications. The only reason he hadn't carried it out? My father was already dying. Richard Steinberg tried to withdraw as counsel so fast he literally tripped over his own briefcase. But the judge wasn't finished with him. Dorothy's recordings proved he had knowingly suborned perjury. His law license was suspended before lunch. Then the victims entered. 14 women. All over 60. Pearls. Sensible shoes. Steel in their voices. Each told the same story, with different names, different years, different states. Over $3 million stolen across 20 years. The civil suits alone would crush him. But the criminal charges were what truly ended him. The IRS agent actually smiled while reading the charges. Tax evasion. Tax fraud. False returns. Hidden income. The list went on for 20 straight minutes. Frank owed $1.4 million in back taxes, and nearly $3 million with penalties. Everything was frozen. Even the loose change in his car's cup holder. Then my mother took the stand. Calm. Steady. Clear. When asked about Frank's character, she said only this. I was grieving. He was hunting. The entire courtroom fell silent. But the moment that destroyed Frank completely was Brittany. Facing her own charges, she flipped. Instantly. She told them everything. Every scam. Every lie. Every crime. She even handed over recordings she had secretly kept, insurance for the day Frank turned on her. The scorpion had finally stung itself. Then the federal prosecutor, Jessica Torres, who looked like she ate defense attorneys for breakfast, delivered the final blow. This wasn't just fraud. It was racketeering. Frank hadn't acted alone. He was part of a national network that targeted widows across the country. The fake luxury goods had been funding terrorism. The money laundering moved through 6 countries. Frank wasn't facing prison time. He was facing the kind of sentence usually reserved for organized crime bosses. By the end of the day, bail was denied. His passport had already been flagged. He'd tried to book a flight to Costa Rica that very morning. Every asset frozen. Every exit sealed. The man who once pushed me to the floor was now the one falling. And this time, no one was going to help him up. New Year's Eve arrived wrapped in champagne and vindication. This time, the family gathering was at grandmother's house. She declared the old venue tainted by Frank's presence, and absolutely no one dared to argue with her when she used that tone. The atmosphere felt unreal. The same people who once watched in silence as Frank shoved me aside were now treating me like I was some kind of heroic survivor. Uncle Ted, of all people, had become my loudest supporter, mostly because his video had just been optioned for a true crime documentary. He was getting paid. To his credit, he donated half to charity and kept the rest for what he called his apology fund, which mostly meant taking me to absurdly expensive dinners to make up for having once been an idiot. Jennifer proved herself a true cousin through all of it. She spent the entire week helping other victims file paperwork, all completely pro bono. Watching Frank get destroyed is payment enough, she said. Somewhere in the chaos, she even started dating Agent Chen's partner, a kind FBI accountant named David, who loved spreadsheets just as much as she loved justice. My mother arrived early to help set up. She had been in therapy since December 27th, an intensive program for victims of long-term manipulation. She looked different. Not just happier, but present in a way she hadn't been for over a decade. She had started wearing red again. My father's favorite color on her. She pulled me aside. I need to apologize properly, she said, not to the room, but to me. Not for being fooled. Grief makes fools of us all. But for choosing comfort over courage. For letting him dim your light so I wouldn't have to see my own darkness. Her voice trembled. You deserved a mother who fought for you. Instead, you had to fight for both of us. The room went silent. But this silence was different from Christmas Eve. This was respect. Acknowledgement. The kind of silence that heals instead of wounds. Then grandmother stood. She raised her champagne glass. This family failed Simona once, she said firmly. We will not fail her again. And we will not forget that justice came not from us, but despite us. She looked straight at me. May we earn the forgiveness she's showing us tonight. At exactly midnight, as the ball dropped on TV, my phone vibrated. A notification. The trust had activated. The family business was officially mine. The house was in my name. Every protection my father had placed into motion had triggered right on schedule. It was January 1st. A new year. A new life. A new beginning. Frank welcomed the new year in federal detention. Brittany had been released on bail, but under strict house arrest at a halfway house. Her Instagram dreams replaced with court-mandated community service. She had gotten a job at McDonald's. The uniform did not photograph well. Someone sent me a picture from the detention center's New Year's celebration. They'd had sparkling apple cider and stale cookies. Frank sat alone in the corner, wearing orange instead of Armani. The man who had always needed to be the center of attention was now just inmate number 484-7329. The best surprise of all? The documentary producers wanted to interview me. The working title was Push Down, Standing Up, A Christmas Crime Story. They offered enough money to restart the scholarship fund my father had created before he died. Frank's downfall would now fund other people's dreams. 6 months later, I sat in my father's office, now truly mine, preparing for Frank's sentencing hearing. The federal case had moved quickly and mercilessly. Frank had pleaded guilty to 47 charges, hoping for leniency. He didn't get it. The judge, a woman named Patricia Hawkins, one of my father's former clients, didn't hide her disgust. Frank was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. The courtroom erupted into applause. Highly unusual. But Judge Hawkins allowed it. Sometimes, she said, justice deserves recognition. Brittany received 2 years of probation and 3,000 hours of community service. Strangely enough, she became a decent employee at McDonald's. Even earned a promotion to shift manager. Her Instagram now featured motivational quotes about redemption and photos of her mopping floors with captions like, "Humble beginnings. Character development at last." The family business didn't just survive. It exploded. Freed from Frank's toxic grip, productivity jumped 40%. We reclaimed contracts he had destroyed. Gained new ones from the publicity. I introduced profit sharing so everyone had real ownership in our success. For the first time, the company felt clean. Alive. Honest. My mother sold the tainted family home and bought a smaller place near the beach. And yes, she started dating my father's old friend, Mitchell, the lawyer from Denver, the man who had kept the real will safe all those years. Mitchell was nothing like Frank. He was quiet. Kind. The type of man who listened more than he spoke. And when he decided to propose to my mother, he asked me for permission first. I gave it gladly. The Victims Network had become a formal nonprofit, helping widows recognize and escape predatory relationships. Barbara from the book club became its president. They named it the Simona Foundation. I cried the first time I saw the letterhead. They had already helped dozens of women escape manipulation before it became imprisonment. Agent Chen, Sarah, as I now called her, became a real friend. The Frank case earned her a promotion and a teaching position at Quantico. She used his downfall as a textbook example of how greed, control, and narcissism inevitably collapse under their own weight. Frank had become a cautionary tale. The documentary aired to massive ratings. Uncle Ted became a minor celebrity, traveling the country giving talks about bystander intervention and the danger of family silence. He donated every single speaking fee to domestic violence shelters. And with his video royalties, he bought me a gift I'll never forget. A beautiful blue Tesla. The license plate read, "Pushed back." But the most important moment still waited. I visited Frank in prison. Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. But to deliver something. I handed him a single photograph. It was the Christmas dinner table, fully set. And at the head of it, my chair stood proudly restored. A bronze plaque gleamed on the back. Simona's throne. That seat was never about hierarchy, I told him. It was about family recognizing family. You'll never understand that. Because you were never family. You were just a parasite who mistook patience for weakness. He opened his mouth to respond. But I was already walking away. The guards later told me he stared at that photo for hours. Finally realizing that one push had cost him everything. While giving me back everything he tried to steal. 1 year after the Christmas push, we gathered again for the holidays. The table was full. actually, fuller than ever. Sarah Chin came. So did several women from the victims' network who had nowhere else to go. Mitchell was there too, nervously practicing his toast as my mother's new husband. Even Brittany was invited. She chose instead to volunteer at a homeless shelter. She sent a handwritten card. It was simple. And for the first time, it was genuine. My grandmother, 86 years old, sharper than ever, stood and raised her glass. Last year, she said, we learned that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. This year, we've learned that redemption is possible for those who seek it. And justice, while sometimes delayed, is always worth fighting for. Glasses clinked. And in that sound, I heard something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. I thought of my father's final words. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. The balance had been restored. Frank pushed me down in front of 23 silent witnesses. Now he was falling for 25 years in front of the entire world. And this time? Nobody was silent about what he deserved. They say you should be careful who you push down. Because they might know how to get back up. But Frank learned a harder truth. Be careful who you push down at Christmas dinner. They might have a dead father who planned for this exact moment. An FBI agent posing as your mistress. And a grandmother who's been quietly documenting your crimes. While pretending she doesn't know how her iPhone works. The price of one push? Everything Frank ever schemed for, stole, and built on lies came crashing down from a single moment of cruelty. He thought he was pushing down a weak stepdaughter. Instead, he pushed the first domino of his own destruction. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe. A new story is coming.